So did I buy a lemon? Today I'm going to talk about all the things that I went through with my bike, and you can tell me what you think, whether you think it was a lemon or maybe not. And I'll give you a bit of a spoiler. There's different reasons why a bike or a car is a lemon, but in this case it's not because of poor quality or poor manufacturing. It was simply the age of the bike and the way it was treated during its lifetime. But anyway, welcome to my channel where we talk about bikes and more. I'll be talking about the things that I went through with my bike, the things that I had to fix, the journey that I went through with it, all the problems that I found. And at the end, as usual, we'll share another Bible verse, so please stick around for that. So the first thing is the buying process. So how did I end up with a lemon? Well, I kind of knew that there was a lot of like warning signs, you could say. When I saw the bike, I noticed that it had been painted. It wasn't the original paint. A lot of the stickers were missing, and I asked the guy, and he said yes, it was painted. The paint job is quite poor as well. It's one of those, it looks good from far, but it's far from good. So when I went, and the bike was cheap, it was advertised at $4,200, and I got it down to $3,600. And I went kind of interstate, so I went into Canberra. It was about a 2-hour drive. I hired a trailer. When I first saw the bike, it looked okay, I guess. I grabbed the brake lever and the thing just went straight down to the bar, but I thought, you know what, I don't care, I'll fix it. And I should also mention that even though I go through all these problems, and you might think, how could someone sell something like this? The guy did push back a bit initially when I expressed interest, and he said no, he wanted to hold it on for a bit longer and fix some things up, and he said he'll drive it down to Sydney. But I pushed back on him and I said, look, no, I just want it. I was kind of desperate for a bike. I hadn't been riding for a bit, and I just wanted one. So the first time I got it off the trailer, and I just rode it just to do a U-turn to drive it up my driveway. And two things I noticed: when I hit the brakes, there was nothing until right in the end, and then it almost locked up, so I almost fell off. And the other thing was the throttle was getting stuck. So I pulled the throttle a bit, showing off a bit, and the throttle wouldn't come back and would just sort of rev out for a bit before it finally came back, which is also dangerous. Anyway, I needed to get the bike registered, so I fixed all of that up, and I started to notice the first thing, that things just weren't put together properly. So the throttle was stuck because the cable was just not aligned properly, and I just found I had to just adjust it around just so that the throttle would snap back. With the brakes, I bought some braided lines, and I really, with that master cylinder that I had, the original one, I just had issues. I couldn't get braking power. It would go all the way down to the bar, and I'd only get maybe 50% of the braking power. So I bought a Brembo master cylinder, RCS17, I think it's called. Anyway, I still always struggled with braking power, but it was okay with the master cylinder. Maybe I'd go 50-60% to the down before it started to grab, but I was okay with that. I did about 1,000 kilometers just riding around back and forward to work, and then as I was driving to work, and nearly sort of just down the road to get to work, my commute takes about an hour, and I was just right to the end of the commute, just in my street, out where I work, and I noticed a smell of fuel, and I didn't think anything of it because the bike always kind of smelled like fuel a little bit, but this was a bit stronger. And then as I was riding up a hill just near my work, I noticed that the back wheel was a bit funny, and I felt like it was like a flat tire. And so I was near a coffee shop, my friend's coffee shop, and I just pulled in and just to see if I had a flat rear tire, and it turned out it wasn't flat, but there was petrol just poured all over the back wheel, pouring all over the back wheel, and petrol was still sort of just pouring out of it. Anyway, I left the bike there, and I came in and got a trailer, and I towed it home. And I realized the problem was that the main hose from the fuel pump to the injection, or to the intake, it just was not on properly. It wasn't sitting on properly. It was like someone installed it but didn't install it properly. So when you install one of these hoses, you need to push the hose over the flange, and you need to then click it down with the clip, and it needs to be a distinct click. If you're trying to push it and it's not clicking in, it's not on right. It needs to go. The hose needs to go all the way over the flange, and then have a distinct, easy-ish click down, and then you know it's on. Secondly, you shouldn't really. It was undone from the fuel pump side of the hose, and when you're taking the petrol tank off, you shouldn't take it from that side. You should take it from where the fuel injection is, because there's a lot easier access, and it's a lot easier to put the clip back on. It takes a little bit of force to push the hose on. So that's the other mistake, that you just shouldn't take it off from the fuel pump side, unless maybe the tank's out and you want to change the hose. Anyway, I fixed that problem. I started riding again, but I noticed I was having funny suspension problems. It was kind of, I couldn't describe it. It was maybe wallowing, just kind of the rear tire felt like it was pushing outwards when I was going around a corner. It just felt weird. I finally decided that I needed to. I'll take the rear shock out, and I took it to a place to take a look. A specialist shocks, motorcycle shocks, and he was there, and we decided to test it together. And he put the gauge on to see how much pressure it had. It should have, I think, around 200 psi or around that, and it was 0. So, he told me he could rebuild my shock. It didn't cost that much, maybe $200 Australian, that is. And he told me that I should grease the link arm bearings for the suspension. So it was covered, and it was going to take a few weeks for him to fix my shock. So I thought, I'll just change all those bearings. And that's when I got started, and I changed all the link arm needle bearings, and I decided I should take the swing arm off and change the swing arm bearings. And then to take that off, I noticed I had to take the rear wheel off. Now, I had funny, ever since I got the bike, I had this funny, like slack between on and off power. And I thought, well, maybe that's the cush washers. The cush rubbers. And these cush rubbers, they're in the wheel, in the hub, to dampen, the acceleration off the chain. And I thought, well, maybe they're broken. So I thought I'll take the wheel off. First thing I noticed when I took the wheel off was the nut. The main wheel nut was finger tight. And I thought, this is going to be very hard to take off. So I used the shifter, and I realized that there was no torque on the nut. Following from that, I started to take off the nuts for the sprocket, and I noticed that there was no torque on those nuts as well. And that's what was causing, I think, that slack between power on and off. Anyway, I got a brand new chain, like I think it's an RK chain, and I got a super sprock aluminium with the steel teeth. And I decided I should change the front sprocket as well. I took the front sprocket off, and I realized that the sprocket that was on there was on the wrong way, so it needs to be riding side up. Anyway, so I changed all of them. I had the wheel off. I noticed I went to change the wheel bearings just because I had the wheels off, and I just wanted to go through the whole bike. And the wheel bearings were fine, but the other bearing at where the hub is, where the rear sprocket is, that bearing had a bit of problems. Like, it wasn't smooth, and it was a bit damaged. So I changed that one, which was good. And I noticed another thing when I was riding. Since I first got this funny jingling sound, and I thought maybe, if I change all this stuff, maybe that's normal, maybe that's part of the bike is. But as I was putting the swing arm on, by the way, I changed the swing arm bearings, and I noticed that the bolts on the swing arm bearings were not put on properly by the previous owner. So I set them in properly. I changed the bearings. The bearings were fine, but I changed them anyway. And I set the actual nut in properly to be, deep in. It wasn't set in properly. And as I was putting the swing arm on, I noticed there was this jiggling. So I jiggled the swing arm around, and out popped a 10mm spanner, which was sitting in the swing arm that whole time. Anyway, after I did all of that, I bought new or aftermarket brake discs, front and rear, like the actual disc, the rotor, and the pads. So I changed them, but when I went to change them, I noticed one of the bolts was broken on the rear. So instead of having 4 bolts on the rear hub, on the rear rotor, there was 3, and one was broken. Luckily, I went back to the guy who did my shock. I called him because I was trying to find other guys who extract bolts, and they told me to actually call the guy who does the shocks. They said, he's this old guy and he works on bikes, and then his name is this and that. The shop is shock trip, and I'm like, oh, well, that's where my shock is right now. So anyway, I took it to him, and me and him just sort of spent an hour or so in his workshop, and we got extracted the bolt. The reason that it was broken, I think, was because the previous owner had changed the rotor, but they put the wrong glue or adhesive on the bolt. There should be non-permanent adhesive. So I think permanent adhesive was used, and that's probably why the bolt had snapped previously. So there was previous attempts. The other thing I noticed is there was just these little bits missing, just like the guard on the pegs and things. But it's a very funny story. I'll tell you this. After I bought the bike, my cousin used to own one of these over 10 years ago. I remember him having, before I was even thinking about riding, I remember he had one. So this is maybe 10, 12 years ago. And I rang him when I bought this bike just to tell him, I wanted a spray gun. I wanted to borrow a spray gun. But I told him, I said, I bought a 636. And he's like, because I knew he had one. And then he goes to me, I've got some spare parts. Do you want them? He goes, his younger brother, who was still living at home, had called him half an hour before I rang him. Half an hour before I called my cousin, his younger brother called him, who was still at home. And he had all these bits from this old 636 that my cousin had. And he rang his older brother. And he said, I want to chuck these parts out. Do you want them? And he said, no, just chuck them out. Right? Half an hour later, I ring, and I say I bought one. And I needed these parts, the pegs, the little feelers on the pegs were all round down, there was missing parts. And then he's like, let me call my brother now, because I just told him to throw the parts away. And it's just so coincidental that these parts have been sitting in the garage for 12 years. I call my cousin to get a spray gun, and he tells me, well, do you want some parts? My brother just rang me and he said he was going to chuck them out like half an hour ago. Better ring him back before he chucks them out. Anyway, that was a real help. I got a lot of bits. I even got a lot of fairings, which I threw them away. I didn't want them, but I got a lot of bits and pieces that I needed for the bike. And as I was putting everything together, the last thing I noticed was the mountings was not sitting on. I noticed there was just a gap in the mounting, and I thought, that doesn't seem right. So I just took a photo of it and I put it on a forum, the ZX6R forum, which I highly recommend if anyone has like a Kawasaki Ninja to go on that forum. Anyway, I put it on and someone's like, dude, open up your service manual, follow the process of mounting your engine. Your engine is not mounted in properly. So anyway, it turns out that there is this process of there's 4 bolts, and there's a process on which ones to torque up first. And part of that, I actually realized that one of the castle nut was actually missing off the bike. And I also noticed that when you take apart an engine, when you take an engine out and using the mounts, you can use an Allen key, or you can use the bolt to. There's a bolt that guides the engine into place before you tighten up the main bolt, and the clearance between like these bolts and the engine should be 0, but it shouldn't be on tight. And I noticed that some of them were actually threaded, and I think it's a really easy thing to do, because maybe some people just keep turning these bolts. They don't know how to unbolt the engine properly, and they keep turning these guiding bolts, and they push them in too far and they get threaded. So anyway, I replaced them, and I also noticed that the engine didn't have an engine number. So I think there's a story that I'm starting to build up with this bike, and I would make a guess that this bike was a track bike, and that's why the pegs, the little feelers on the pegs were ground down due to heavy cornering, like low lean angle and things like that. And I have a feeling that the previous engine had blown, and they had somehow got a new engine, whether it was stolen, whether it was, I don't know, something else, something not quite legit, and they've just thrown this engine in, didn't put it back together properly, and they sold it. But as I said, the guy wanted to push back, and he didn't want to sell it to me, but I don't think he would have gone to all the effort of the way I got it going. So other than that, I think they were the main, just the way it was neglected or not put together properly is really the cause. But how do I feel about it? I don't know. I still like the bike. I spent a fair bit of money on like tools and parts. So like I said, I bought it for $3,600, and I probably spent another $3,600 just on tools and parts and bits and pieces. So I spent in total quite a bit, which is, I guess, what makes a bike a lemon, when you spend more than what it's actually worth. And I think just because of its age, I had one of the spark coils go. I replaced them aftermarket ones. They're going okay. Then I had an oil leak because I didn't put the rocker, the cover on, engine cover on properly. I went and redid that, and then now I've noticed, after doing all of that, I've got another oil leak, slightly less, but I still need to check that out. Hopefully it's something simple like one of the side engine covers. But I mean, is it a lemon? Well, the other thing is, it's not a car, so there is no emotion attached to a car, and that's why when you buy a car and you spend a lot of money on it and things keep breaking down, a car is a lemon. But a bike is different. Yes, I have spent a lot of time on it. I have spent a fair bit of money on it, but it's still, there's that emotional attachment. That whole process of fixing everything, all the downtime I had with it, like the months, was, I don't know, I kind of enjoyed it. I learned a lot about how bikes work. So I don't know, it's not as straightforward as just saying it's a lemon. I did get enjoyment out of spending the months putting it, taking it apart, and I'm kind of happy with. I know that all the parts in it are good compared to, say, another older bike where you just ride around and it doesn't cause problems, but you never really know. So I've got a bit of assurance, but still, like, anything can go wrong. It's an old bike. It's maybe coming up to 17 years old now. But I just want to keep riding it. I enjoy it. They feel different. The the 2000 model bikes feel a bit different, especially the super sport ones. They feel a little bit different to the newer ones, and I like that feeling of the casualness, which I made a video about previously. So anyway, I'm not sure how far I'm going to get with this bike. I'm just going to keep riding it as much as I can, and I don't know if I'm actually going to give up on it or whether it's just going to serve me a lot of more kilometers ahead. So let's just end with a Bible verse here, which is from Proverbs chapter 19 verse 3, and it says, "A person's own folly leads to their ruin, yet their heart still rages against the Lord." And I think that's a very true verse. I mean, sometimes we cause our own mistakes and we get angry at God, or if you're not a religious person, you blame bad luck. or something. But a lot of the times it's our own decisions, it's our own way that we go in life. Maybe we're being dishonest, we're committing sins against God, and we get caught out. Maybe we lie, we get caught out in our lies. Maybe we commit adultery, fornication, and then wonder, why is my marriage falling apart? And I'm not saying that's always the case. Maybe sometimes things just happen, but I think maybe most of the time, we cause our own problems. So anyway, that's all I've got. Please hit like, and if you like this content, and think about subscribing, and leave a comment, and ride safe.